Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Vorhies, your host. I'm the Editorial Director with Data Science Central and also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. So I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Tableau for sponsoring today's event. Tableau is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some other recent sponsors, including IBM, Alteryx, Databricks, SciSense, Click, and Data Robot, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's webinar is entitled Using Data Visualization to Inform and Inspire, and that'll be presented by Tableau. But before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We'll have one presenter that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be 10 to 15 minutes of Q&A following the presentation. And today's event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. Now, I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation, as we'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Well, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Ben Jones with Tableau. Ben is the Director of Outreach Programs for Tableau Software in Seattle, and he's also the author of the book Communicating Data with Tableau. That's by O'Reilly. Now, he leads a team of data analysts that work with journalists and bloggers to share interactive data on the web. He's also an avid user of Tableau Public himself, publishes vizzes and tutorials at Data Remixed. Now, Ben holds a BSME from UCLA and an MBA from Cal Lutheran. He has a background in mechanical engineering and business and is co-chair of the Tapestry Data Storytelling Conference. So thanks for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. Now, when communicating with audiences, we need to present data in a way that gives them an accurate understanding of our topic, but often we also need to motivate them to do something with the information. How can we engage both the intellect as well as the emotions of the people in our audience? So in today's Data Science Central webinar, Ben Jones of Tableau will share some ways of both to inform as well as to inspire our audience when presenting data. So Ben, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Bill. Hey, everyone. Thanks for the introduction. As Bill mentioned, my name is Ben Jones. I'm actually really excited about this topic that I'm going to talk to you about today because, it's really all about using this new medium of data and data visualization to be able to communicate with people. And there's ways to do that well, and there's ways to do that poorly. And I think we're seeing right now a huge amount of activity and innovation in this space. And I've been able to, observe and admire a lot of the work of people who are publishing things that they're excited about, topics of interest to them, and ways in which we need to learn about the world we live in. And, I've learned a lot being able to manage this product, this platform, Tableau Public, and I want to share some things with you. Now, you may be asking or saying to yourself as we go along, really, can I really apply those things to what I do in my job, where I work? Is it really, something that I can apply? And I'd like to challenge you to think about that, because I believe that there are ways in which we can take even the artistic things that people create and use those to improve the way we do business. And I think that it'll be helpful in the workplace as well as in our lives. Okay, so let's dive into this now. This topic is called Using Data Visualization to Inform and Inspire. I'll start real quick with a story. I live in Seattle, as Bill mentioned. I moved up here from Los Angeles about 5 years ago to join Tableau. And my friends thought I was crazy, Here's this guy. He's trading in these the beautiful sunny beaches of Southern California. Why would you ever leave that? Well, it is beautiful. It's true. I was just back there last week, and staying with my brother in Hermosa Beach, had a great time down there. And I did ask myself, why did I leave all this? But, you know, the way I came to see it is I traded in these sunny beaches for these beautiful, lush forests of Western Washington. And I took the time since I've been up here, and I want to talk a little bit about it. It may seem a little tangential, but I want to talk about the beauty of the place I live in here, because it's affected the way I think about data, if that makes sense. And I think by the time I'm done, it will. But it's gorgeous up here. You know, if you get out on the trails and you walk around, it's very beautiful. And there's so many things to see around here in this part of the country that would really just really blow your mind. And so that is something that's been a pleasant surprise to me as I, struggle to, quote unquote, make Seattle work. I came up here only to realize that it's a beautiful place. Now, don't tell your friends about that because the real estate prices are already high enough out here. So, because it is true, actually, that I did trade in, move northward. It involved another kind of move northward up the list of rainy cities. So LA is way down there, number 48, 36 rainy days per year. Imagine that, just 36 days where it actually rains in a year. And I did go from that all the way up here to Seattle, which is 6th on the list with 149 rainy days per year. So that is true. That is true. But, again, trying to find the silver lining here, I like to think of it as just seeing myself moving from kind of the same thing, a place where people really love to jump over these large bodies of water to another place where people just like to jump over large bodies of water. So there you have it there. So some similarities there. Definitely oceans of puddles around town. So Seattle, it's gorgeous. I love it here, and I've been very inspired in a couple different places since I moved here. On the left-hand side there, you can see an artistic rendering of what's now our current building, where I'm actually presenting out of right now in Seattle. And on the right-hand side, you can see my boys on the trail. So when I got here, the thing that is in common about both of these two environments that I'm going to talk to you about is that my eyes saw these amazing things. First in the office and second in the outdoors. So I'm going to talk to you about what I saw in these two places. And I want to talk about how they've shaped my thoughts about how to communicate data well. So my goal in doing that is to impress upon you the value of striving to both inform and inspire others anytime you present data. And to give you some practical tips on how to use Tableau to do just that so you can have a bigger impact on your business. Okay, that's my goal today. So I want you to challenge that. I want you to ask me questions as we go. And again, we'll reserve 10 to 15 minutes at the end, and we'll have a conversation about this. So firstly, let's talk about what I saw in the office. So Tableau is a company that obviously, we are a data company. And I have found that, the things that I've seen in the office have been things that have been very visually inspiring. So even the place that we call home here, our headquarters, is a very visually inspiring place. But it's also a place where pixels on a screen are being converted into perspective in my mind on a daily basis. All right? So, for example, this is the visualization that I use to track the growth of Tableau Public. So at Tableau, we believe strongly in using our products to understand our own business. It's one of the core values of our company. So we use Tableau all day, to track, see how things are going. And this dashboard, as I mentioned, tracks the growth of Tableau, the platform. It tells me how many new people are signing up for Tableau Public. It tells me how many workbooks they're uploading and how many times those workbooks have been viewed by people around the world. So we're looking at this, this is data. We're trying to understand blips, and we're trying to understand outliers and trends, and using this basically pixels on a screen to think and to make decisions. Here's another one that shows how the platform is being used on a worldwide basis. So one of the things we love about Tableau Public is that it's a very global footprint product. So 2/3 of all the views of Tableau Public come from outside the US and Canada. So it's a very international platform. People from all over the world, Brazil to Belarus and Australia, every continent are using Tableau Public to tell the stories of our time with data. And we like to see where people are reading it. This is Google Analytics data that we imported into Tableau. So I get to track that and see where around the world people are using this thing called data visualization and data journalism. Another thing that I saw as I joined Tableau and started to work in the office day in and day out was visualizations about the world we live in. So I get exposed to these visualizations people publish, that this one, for example, showing every hurricane in the Western Pacific in the year 2012 and the path that it took as it traveled across the ocean and then the land. You can see how many hurricanes there were, when they happened, over the course of the year. Obviously, this is a hot topic right now. And you get to see and have a different kind of perspective about this phenomenon by the fact that people are taking time to encode this information in charts and maps and graphs. So we start to learn about the world and how things are happening. Again, this is pixels on a screen. That's all it is, right? We're just looking at colors and we're looking at things that our brain is then taking in and coming to an understanding. And there's a whole host of things that we've seen, every single day now about the world we live in. So in this way, I became better informed. I feel like my team would do great in Jeopardy. We learn about lots of things because of the visualizations people publish. And obviously, us as a team, we use these visualizations to improve the way we do things and grow. So information is coming into our minds, and we're using that to do things, to make decisions, to make plans, and to put them into place to try to improve the situation, right, in our business and out there. And so, using data to inform, that became something I became very comfortable with. But I want to it occurred to me at some point that there's actually a comparison to be made with what happened when I set out on the trails of this beautiful state of Washington. Because I was also visually inspired by what I saw as I walked around in the hills, in the mountains, and the waterfronts of Seattle and the surrounding area. So there's a great quote that I love that says, "Choose your companions before you choose your road." That's by Patrick Lencioni. And so I did that. Here's my two companions. My two companions are Aaron and Simon. These are my two boys. And we hit the trails together. Had a little book, and we've been checking off page by page the trails that we can go on. Hiking provides them a much-needed break from their video games, and they'll admit to that. It also provides me a much-needed break from data and from a laptop screen, and I'll admit to that. So we get out there together. It's a beautiful time. And this is us, for example, at Wallace Falls, which is about an hour northeast of Seattle. Wallace Falls is a particular beautiful trail if you're ever in the area because it features two views of the falls, a lower and a middle view of the fall, as well as an upper section that provides a great view of the valley below. So a great trail to take visitors on. So I wasn't really very much into photography before I moved up here, but I started to just be amazed at these things that I would see. And so I bought myself a little mirrorless camera to try to document it, try to capture some of the beauty if I could find a way to do that. This is us at a place called Cannon Beach in Oregon, which is on the coast there, and Haystack Rock. It's a beautiful place, and you can see as the tide goes out, you can walk all the way out there. So I started to kind of like capture these images and try to just at least sort of see, what could I do there. Now I saw sweeping mountain views like this one. This is on the Little Mount Si trail. And then I saw, these just from sweeping mountain views to every now and then I'd be lucky enough to capture this sort of like wildlife that would just kind of fill my soul with a feeling of calm and really just affect me emotionally. This is a red-winged blackbird in Port Angeles on the Olympic Peninsula. Just relaxing to see the bird perch like that. And these photographs, again, to me, they have the ability to sort of affect my mood. There's also just amazing lush and mossy forests here in Seattle that are just teeming with growth and life. In fact, this one I posted to Facebook, and a friend of mine back in Los Angeles had to comment that he thought I left California and moved to the forest moon of Endor. So I haven't actually, nor have my boys, seen any Ewoks yet. As great as that would be, I think it would make their day. But we're definitely looking out for them. But suffice it to say, the three of us have been visually inspired by the things we've seen with our own two eyes on the trail. And you say, well, what does that have to do with data? Nothing. But actually, the way it came together for me was with this platform called Tableau Public. Now, let me tell you a little bit about it, because you might not know what it is. So Tableau Public is a free tool that we put out there for anyone in the world who wants to connect to their data and make interactive data graphics and put them on the web, on social media, about topics that they care about and that they're interested in. So that's what Tableau Public is. It's totally free. And it's not just a tool to create a visualization, it's a platform to share it. So we see data about national elections, we see data about the Olympics and people's favorite sports teams. We see data from devices people wear, like their Fitbits, or maybe their home city's open data portal, and their communities, things that they care about that are happening around them. And they turn that data into visuals that help us understand our world. And also, though, not just helping us understand something, facts, but they affect the way we feel about our place in that world. So Tableau Public is a tool that enables journalists, bloggers, scientists, students, all of them are telling the stories of our time using data. It's a different kind of angle on those stories, and it's one because of the medium and because of the fact that people are able to do this on their own time about things they care about. There starts to become this artistic flavor to the things that people are creating. Let me show you some examples. I'm going to show you examples of work that people have created that, to me, again, are both informative as well as visually striking. Here's an example from two collaborators. One, his name is Jacob Olsufka, and one, his name is Roddy Zakovich. Jacob's here in Seattle, and Roddy is down in Florida. And if you're a baseball fan, you know there's this magical play called the triple play, where, in one single play, the defensive team manages to get 3 people out in the exact same play. It's very rare, and it doesn't, it's kind of an amazing thing when you see it happen. And so what they're trying to do is visualize every single one of the 711 times a triple play has happened in the major leagues that's been recorded. And they're showing which player passed the ball to which player, threw the ball to which player to get which player out, and so forth. And you can kind of investigate and see what are the most common kinds of triple plays. But you can see that the color palette they've chosen, you can see that the visualization types they've created create this really sort of rich and interesting experience that is more than just information being displayed in a factual way. It's artistic. And we appreciate good design as people, don't we? I mean, you drive in a car, you want that to be designed well. You sit down in your desk, you want that to be ergonomic. You want things on your wall to be, beautiful. You want the tools you use in the kitchen to have elegance and minimalistic, perhaps, functionality to help you get the job done. But we appreciate good design. And you can look at this and you can see they've spent a lot of time and effort designing this layout and how they're going to show these 711 plays. Okay? Here's another one by actually a friend of mine named Michael Mixon. He's down in Gig Harbor in Washington here. And he wanted to show, this is part of a community-led initiative called Makeover Monday, which is led by Andy Kriebel and Ava Murray. And what they do is they put a data set out there for people around the world to remake a visualization and try to show a different take on it and how you can visualize it. It's amazing. There's dozens and dozens, sometimes hundreds of people who are creating different types of visualizations based on the exact same, sometimes very small data set, and showing how that can be, viewed in a different way. Michael took a very artistic view on this one. He's showing times in which bicycles have been stolen in the UK from June 2014 to May 2017, how often they happen over the course of the year, and you can see a little bit of a seasonal trend there in the timeline at the bottom. And the right-hand side, you can see the bicycles that have been stolen, as well as not only how many times bicycles get stolen, but relatively how few times the thief actually gets prosecuted, just 2%. But notice he decided to include this dark image of a bicycle all by itself, right there in the city of London. It's kind of at nighttime, it's cloudy. It creates a mood, right? It creates almost like a haunting feel and about a sort of upsetting and insidious topic, right? And so, there's some design here. There's some thought given to how he can show the color palette that's very dark blue and black and gray, and the layout. And the photograph is very central to that piece. It's right there in the middle in the top left. So you are introduced to the topic in a way that's really striking a certain kind of mood immediately and making you feel almost dark about this topic, right? So again, this combination of photographs and data and design and color in a way that doesn't just communicate information about the fact that, whatever it is here, like 49 out of 50 bicycles that get stolen never get prosecuted, but how the fact that it's happening all across the country, right? And how it's happening most often in summer times, et cetera. So he spent a lot of time designing this visualization. And I love it. I love it because it's creative and it's analytical. A lot of times you say, well, I'm a very creative person. Or, you say, no, actually, I'm a very analytical person. Here's someone who's both. He didn't take the opt-out and saying, well, I'm just one or the other, and that's all I am. No, he's been able to kind of say, maybe I can accomplish both of these things in an artistic way and an informative way. Make sense? So that's my point. I love it. Now here's another one by R.J. Andrews. R.J. runs InfoWeTrust.com. He's an award-winning designer of data visualizations. And I love this one. He created this visualization which shows all the a number of mammals in the continent of Africa. And you can see the ones that are endangered. They're red. They jump out at you. And you can see the ones whose populations are decreasing because the animal's facing to the left, not the right. And so then you can very quickly, as your eyes scan this grouping of animals, see certain kinds of gorillas and antelope and rhinoceros, for example, that are endangered and their populations are decreasing. So these are things that are very worrisome. And he also took the time to size them relative to their actual body size. Again, a very artistic view and look at this data of endangered species, a very important topic, one that matters a lot, clearly, and one that, again, we appreciate the layout here and the color choices. We appreciate the use of shapes to help convey a lot of things right there in a snapshot view. Here's another one here by Nisa Mara. I love this one because, I like to climb mountains. Probably not Mount Everest. That maybe is a little much for me, but she's showing the pathway up Everest and how many people have successfully climbed it over the decades, over the years. And you can see this big spike since the turn of the millennium at the bottom timeline there and people that have climbed Mount Everest. But it also is including, an image of this place itself, a remarkable place. So you learn a lot about the photograph at the top, about where it is and what countries are involved and how people get up there, from the bottom to the top and where they camp out. So, and not only that, but, the temperatures and how that temperature changes over the course of a 24-hour period. And so, again, this artistic view to explaining a topic that's of interest to some. This next one I absolutely love. It's one of my favorites of all time, and it's created by Anya Aturn. Now, Anya runs datablick.com, and she's also a good friend of mine. She's down in San Francisco in the Bay Area, and Anya is such a creative person. What she did is she said to herself, and this is actually inspired, as I understand it, from chatting with her, from a speech by Jimmy Carter called, I believe, Consumptive Malaise. But her idea was to say, what are all the products I consume in a day? It could be anything. It could be a Kleenex. It could be food. It could be just anything that I use or consume. And she wanted to get a better idea about how many things there were, in her life. And so she created this visualization with 222 shapes of objects. And then she categorized them as things I need or things I want. She categorized them by their type: clothing, furniture, utility, vanity, and so forth. And she also included a category of, is this an item that would be specific to females or not? And so she then allows you to interact with this data by these little radio buttons in the top right and the bottom left to group them differently. And when you change the groupings, you can see how, there are things that group a certain way based on what she consumed in a given day. And I thought that was fascinating to take a look at your life in that way and then to communicate it in almost a cartoon layout and design, and one that really invites you to play and invites you to enjoy the experience of working with this data. So again, this is something that's both informative. Look at that big pile of food and drink down there in the want category compared to the size of the food and drink in the need category. Oh, that's interesting. Look at the big size of the pile in the vanity in the want category versus the vanity in the need category, right? So these are all things that help us really come to a better perspective about what Anya uses as she goes throughout a given day. It wasn't created in some boring table or bar chart. She did it in a really interactive and fun way that lets you kind of almost enjoy the experience of working with the data like this. Again, visually interactive and informative, inspiring, but also communicating real numbers. A couple more here. This one's another one by Roddy showing all the amount of words used in Queen albums and songs. Again, a central piece there being the Freddie Mercury image at the bottom, and how just the lyrics just almost just like spray out from his hand right there in a really artistic fan. Just beautiful design, colorful. I love this one by Jewel Loré. She works here at Tableau. I've been fortunate enough to get to know Jewel and work with her together on Tableau Public. But, my kids love this one here. She's creating a visualization about all the Pokemon characters and their attack scores versus their defense scores. Of course you want to use shapes here. Of course you want to use colors that show the groupings and categories of these fun characters, right? This should be enjoyable, even with the big hover here that gives you information about it that looks like a Pokeball, right? So this is fun. I mean, these are just people having a good time and showing things in ways that makes you enjoy the experience as well. Okay, so it leads me to this question. Is data visualization science or art, right? Are we trying to just convey facts? Are we trying to just make pretty pictures, or what? And that's the question. Now, this sort of speaks to two different sides of our brain, really, right? On the one side, you've got, and this is a debate, by the way, that's raged on for years now. You have this artistic left brain and this analytical right brain. So you've got design proponents like David McCandless who like to create beautiful and artistic visualizations like this one on the left-hand side here. And you got business intelligence proponents like Stephen Few and others who prefer to create very detailed data dashboards that communicate in a very dense way, a lot of information in a very accurate and informative way, right? So which is it then? Should data be about informing people like a science, or should it be about inspiring people like an art? But as soon as I say that sentence, I stop myself because I realize that I think I've created a false dichotomy. So, you can say on the one hand, what is science all about? Well, the principal goal of science is to acquire and codify knowledge about this universe we live in. Here's a map of the Milky Way published by the National Geographic, right? Tells us all about this galaxy we live in. And a lot of facts are then called out around this galaxy image here. So this is factual. This is meant to convey information. On the other side of things, you've got, and actually this display was just here at the Seattle Art Museum. It's a display by Yayoi Kusama, a Japanese artist. I got lucky enough to go to that. But this is a different take on a galaxy, isn't it? It's this goal of art here in this installation to fill us with awe and inspire us, to make us feel something powerful. This is infinity mirrors, as I mentioned by Yayoi Kusama. And so maybe data visualization is more like that then, because hey, if I don't feel a compelling need to change as a result of what I see, if it doesn't affect me in some emotional way, then what good is it, right? Did it help me move? Did it help me do anything different? But again, I don't believe in this dichotomy. I think the answer is that it's all about both, because if you think about it, science is actually very inspiring. Here is, for example, a picture from Cape Canaveral of the space shuttle launching. And look at all these people. They're standing around photographing this amazing moment that thousands and thousands of brilliant scientists and engineers worked together to make happen in the space program. Such an inspiring thing. I remember as a kid just being so amazed by the space program and what scientists were learning. It wasn't a factual thing. Sure, there were lots of facts, but it was also something that affected, how I felt. It was an emotional thing. On the other side of the coin, so science isn't just informative. Science is very inspirational. On the other side of the coin, art isn't just inspirational. It's actually very informative. It can be. This is an installment right here in our Tableau office in Seattle. I showed you the outside view. This is a view inside. And this is showing this very interesting kind of installation that hangs from our ceiling. And it actually, it's beautiful. You walk by it, you look up, it's gorgeous. But it's not just something that makes you think, oh, that's nice, that looks beautiful, right? Wow, when an artist created that, how cool. It's actually informative. This is a topographical map of something. Can you guess what it is? I'll give you a clue. It's upside down. Yep, this is a topographical view of our own Mount Rainier, just flipped upside down. So all of the different lines of the installation are contours that show the height profile of the mountain. So it's art, sure, it's beautiful, it's inspirational, but it's also information. It also helps us understand something about the world we live in. And this is why I love these books by another friend of mine, Alberto Cairo, down in University of Miami. Alberto is just a fabulous thinker in the space of data visualization, someone you should get to know if you don't already. But he wrote the book, The Functional Art and the Truthful Art. And think about those titles. It says it all. You know, this is an art form. We're showing people images and pictures just like an artist would. But it's a little different. It's one in which it's highly functional. We're trying to also convey facts and information about the world we live in. So it's both. It's not either or. And of course, it should be that, shouldn't it? I mean, we're talking about communicating with people. Why wouldn't it be like every other form of human expression? Dancing, singing, painting, writing, from the presentations we give to the images we capture on film. The way we communicate with each other conveys both facts and feelings. It's about elucidation as well as emotion. Why would we think of it any other way? But the question I have is, knowing that communicating data should both inform and inspire, how do we accomplish both at the same time? How do we do it? That's something that I want to address now in the second half of this talk. Ways I've learned from people out there that are fabulously talented to do both at the same time. And it boils down to three things. One is thinking like a journalist. The other is expressing like an artist. And the third is relating like a novelist. So thinking like a journalist, expressing like an artist, relating like a novelist. You may say, I'm neither. I'm none of those things. I'm not one of them. I'm an analyst, or I'm a manager in HR or finance. But you can communicate like those three. You can think like those three. You can express and relate to other people just like those three. And I want to talk about that in a little bit of detail and go into some specifics about how I think that can be done. So first, let's talk about how you can think like a journalist. What does that mean? I get to work with journalists all around the world. I go to their conferences. I drop in on their newsrooms. I've gotten to know them. You know, it's an interesting profession right now. It's kind of under fire, isn't it? A lot of conversation about the media and all that and what it's all about. But I've met some people that are journalists that I just have, I think, the world of. And they're out there, you know, trying to tell us things about the world we live in, sometimes at great risk to themselves, depending on what part of the world they're in. All right? So think like a journalist. How can we do that? One way is to write great headlines. So a lot of times the temptation is to make a chart or a graph, copy and paste it into PowerPoint, done, and just show it on a screen. Hey, here's the data, check it out. Well, that's fine and good, but a lot of times maybe the file will be sent and you won't be there to talk someone through it. Or even if you are, they might glaze over because they've seen so many charts and graphs already. Writing great headlines like journalists do, and this is a whole science to this. I barely know how to do it, and I've got a lot to learn about how to do it well. But let me show you an example. This is by a company called PayScale that's here in the Seattle area. PayScale collects information and data and does surveys about employers in a variety of industries. Here's one that they were showing tech employers and how highly they rank based on a number of different categories about job satisfaction. Okay, so you could just title it Comparing Tech Employers. There it is. There's the data, you know. You've got some employers like Facebook in dark blue that have lower median age and higher percent female and so forth. Or you can have others, perhaps like IBM, that have the opposite of that. And someone can just play with the data and figure it out for themselves, right? Go ahead, explore. There you go. It's all yours. But I like what they chose to do. They gave it a title, Spot Check, which makes me interested. And then it poses a question, which I want to know the answer to. How did top tech employers compare? I want to know. I work for a tech company. How do they compare? And then they go on and describe. Want to know what it's like to work at a top tech firm like Google, Facebook, or Amazon? PayScale compared 18 tech employers on 9 different data points. Which employer looks like the right fit for you? There's a whole different level of engagement now. They've asked me a question about me, about what I like, about what I care about. And they've shown that the data here is something that can relate to that. Okay, so a good title, a good lead-in paragraph goes a long way to helping someone get more out of the data you're going to show them. And that's what a journalist does. Here's another example by a friend of mine here in Seattle, Anthony Gould. Anthony works for Slalom Consulting, also runs the Tableau user group here in Seattle. Used to be a fighter pilot. That's neither here nor there. But he made a visualization that I just love called Race to Alaska. And he showed, I didn't know anything about this thing. There's a race, evidently. It looks like it has to do with boats, and it looks like you travel along the coast here up British Columbia, supposedly. I don't know. He could have just titled it Race to Alaska and showed the data. That's not what he did. Here's what he did. He titled it Race to Alaska, no motor, no support, all the way to Alaska. Well, that says a whole lot right there. I got to get it myself in some watercraft. Nobody can help me. I can't turn on a motor, and I've got to get to Alaska. And then he goes on to describe this race. It's a 750-mile boat race from Port Townsend, Washington to Ketchikan, Alaska. The rules are simple, and he goes on. You can see in the paragraph he relates right there. A little bit of thought and effort given to helping completely orient me on something that I probably have never heard about. Most people probably haven't. But you're drawn right in based on his use of words and images here. Notice the titles are often in the top and the lead-in paragraphs in the top left as well, where our eyes are drawn to that. Okay, so journalists use good headlines. Journalists use good lead-in paragraphs. We can do the same with data in our businesses. A big tenet of journalism, right, is to kind of like, it's a service of the public good. That's the way they see it. It's important to know that they see it that way. But what they really are mortified is if they ever mislead someone. They really don't want to allow themselves to ever do that. But it's very possible to mislead your audience with data. This is a picture of a book that Andy Cotgreave, my colleague over in the UK, who works for Tableau, he's our technical evangelist. He bought this book by an author that time almost forgot. Willard Brinton was an author in the early 20th century. So this book is about 100 years old now, called Graphic Methods for Presenting Facts. And in it, Brinton talks about how you can show information in a way that's actually very confusing, like the one on the left-hand side. Evidently, there's some octopus holding bags. I don't know what it has to do with anything, supposedly national waste. But it's a fancy chart that's making it very difficult for me to understand the proportions of these items, liquor, coffee, tea, tobacco. Which one, I think I can tell you which one has the most, but how much more? Is liquor like 10 times more than coffee or 5 times? I have no idea, right? It's hard for me to really even get a vague notion of how much bigger those items are than the other. But on the right-hand side, here's a great example of an image that shows this is about shipping. And I can see that from the freighter at the top in the image. But also the data there is still very accurately displayed. So it's a combination of images and artistic elements as well as data. And those are put together and juxtaposed in a way that helps me kind of get a lot out of it, right? So not showing these artistic forms in a way that confuses people, rather adding artistic forms in a way that augments the data. An example to that, let's talk about the growth of railroad ridership in the U.S. in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So these, as you know, right, this massive spread of rail and trains all across from the east to the west just spanned the country very rapidly. And we can see that in this next visualization. If you wanted to visualize, well, how many more people rode trains, in for example, 1899 than just 12 years later in 1911? How many people rode trains then? Here's one way to show that. I can show like a man that gets really large, right? And this is how a journalist did it. And Brinton was pointing out on the left-hand side, these characters, the smaller of which is supposed to show how many people rode trains in 1899. The larger man on the right showing how many rode in 1911, 12 years later, right? That's kind of hard to even guess how much bigger one guy is than the other. Is it based on height, in which case he's twice as tall? Is it based on like his mass, in which case I really don't even know how much heavier one man is than the other? And people didn't get bigger, right? So even the notion of larger people is kind of, again, not really to the point. So he says, how about this? Just how about an icon for every, certain group of people, right? I think we're talking about here an icon for every million. And that's more in line with what's happening, right? The phenomena is more people are riding trains, not bigger people. You guys get the point. So don't mislead people by the way we do that. Okay, so those are things a journalist tries to do. Many, many more things. Just want to touch on that. We got about 10 minutes left, so let's go through the other ones. Expressing like an artist. I love this one. So, you can use powerful images in your data visualizations. And actually, you can use those images to great effect. There's some academic research this last year by Michelle Borkin and her colleagues that showed that, what they were doing is showing a series of images to people very rapidly. And then afterward, they were asking them to describe those images and finding out if they remembered them when they showed it to them later. And they found that, some visualizations that they showed were highly memorable, like these ones, but really hard for people to describe what they were about. So it's highly likely that I'm going to remember them if you show them to me again, but I can't really explain to you what they're about, right? So these are kind of like flashy and interesting, but really difficult to explain. On the bottom left-hand quadrant, you get these scientific-looking ones that are both forgettable. You show it to me again, I'm not going to even remember I saw it already, and still very difficult to explain, right? Highly technical and, again, not really leaving me with anything to hook me into it. On the other hand, you can have things that are easy to describe. I can tell you what's happening in these visualizations, but again, I'm not likely to remember them. And then on the other hand, you can have images that are both really easy to remember and also very easy to describe what's happening. And that's the ideal. I want to be able to leave someone with something that they'll remember, but also that they'll be able to say, oh yeah, this is what I learned from that. And this is from showing snap images, so it's a little different if you have time. But in any case, I think there's something to be learned here, which is that, things like flag shapes, images like dinosaurs, if that's what the topic is about. Look, the picture of a dinosaur is unforgettable. If you're going to do a visualization about prehistoric creatures, you'd want to show images there, just like what RJ did with the animals in Africa that were going extinct, right? Those images you won't forget. They'll stay with you. But also do it in a way that's helpful and easy for people to understand. The first visualization I ever made was about a great hero of mine, Wayne Gretzky. I'm Canadian, and I moved to Los Angeles in 1986, a year before Wayne Gretzky left Edmonton to join the LA Kings. So I grew up idolizing him. And I made a visualization of his career stats. You can see him up in the top right. And then I added this image from Getty Images that I bought that showed him sweeping through the other top 99 career points earners in the NHL. And I thought it was perfect. There he is as an outlier in the top right. And he's sweeping through these others, and just how amazing he was and how much he stood apart from the rest of the greats of the sport of hockey. And I bumped into someone on the trails, actually, and I was walking toward her and her friend, and I said hello, and they said hello. And she stopped me. It was kind of like this celebrity moment for me, okay? She said to me, oh, didn't you make that Wayne Gretzky visualization? It turns out she and I were on a panel together earlier in the year. I didn't recognize her, but she did, and she remembered this visualization. And I asked myself, would she have remembered it if this is what it was, if this was the final version that I showed? I don't think so. She didn't want to sign anything. It was a little weird for me. I offered. She said, no, thanks. No, I'm just kidding. But it was cool to see that someone remembered something that I created. And again, I think it had a lot to do with the fact that there was an image in there. It made it unforgettable, okay? And that's easy to do, from a how-to point of view. I can just add a background image to any scatter plot in Tableau. Very doable. It didn't take much. Another example of that is if I wanted to show the 1% wealthiest, right? I could do a bar chart showing their share of U.S. household wealth by income level, and the red is that top 0.1%, right? There they are. As you go up, you go sooner more recent in time. But why wouldn't I put a dollar bill on top of that? That seems like it's something that would really draw people in a lot more. And you may say, oh, no, that's a foul. That occludes the data. That blocks the data. It makes it harder to read. True, but there's a trade-off at play here because I realize this is a topic about money, and it actually evokes an emotion, and there's value to that. If I wanted to, grew up watching The Simpsons. If I wanted to see that, I could show episodes with different characters. Why wouldn't I show the characters? There's Homer at the top with his big woohoo moment, right? There he is. Most episodes featured Homer than any other character there, right? Another way to kind of bring in art is to evoke visual metaphors. And this is something that I thought was really neat because I noticed there was something that would always draw me in, like this visualization created by our co-founder and original CEO, Christian Chabot, about companies and how fast they grow. And there's something it's like, whoa, that's really cool. It drew me in. I was like, what is it about that? And I realized that it's almost like you're looking at something on the bottom of the sea. There's like this almost natural view, like a creature or, in this case, an underwater plant. Or another example would be this great visualization by Adam McCann about movie directors and how well their films did over the years. And I was like, hey, this really looks like bubbles in an ocean, right? There's something natural about it that draws me in. Or this visualization that shows the history of the Dow 30 by John Schoen at CNBC, economics reporter. I was like, hey, that, sure, rainbow, okay, yeah, definitely from his color palette, but also kind of looks like this rock strata. This is taken out of Cardigan Island off the coast of the UK. You see these layers and this strata that makes me feel a certain thing, right? Or this one I love because it's like the growth of companies. And doesn't it kind of look like a petri dish? And that's so appropriate, right? You have these companies competing, just like bacteria in a petri dish, some growing fast, some shrinking and dying. The analogy holds, right? There's a metaphor there that holds. Or if we look at unemployment, and we see how this unemployment, this is by Joe Mako, a visualization. Joe's an early influencer of mine in creating visualizations in Tableau. Kind of looks like these Smoky Mountains right here on the border between on Tennessee right there, right? So same kind of a thing, right? The color palette, the choices, the layers, the way you see these almost like mountains and so forth, right? There's something that draws you in about that. But you can combine images and metaphors together. So I remember reading the work of Edgar Allan Poe growing up in middle school and high school, right? Haunting work of poetry. And one time I looked on Wikipedia and saw that actually there's a page that shows every single one of his works, every one of his books and poems that he ever created. And I wondered how many he made over the course of his career and how many years he created his work of literature. Turns out it was from 1824 to 1849 when he was mysteriously died. Right? I can say, oh, here's a way to show that. Every block is an individual work of literature and they're stacked like that. But what if I turn that upside down? It almost gives it a bloody look, right? What if I include his signature there? Because all of these works were works of his own hand. What if I included a photograph of him in there that makes you remember those works of literature you read as well? Right? So we need to be careful with this turning upside down data. It isn't always effective. I'll skip over this example, but suffice it to say that lines don't work so well when you turn them upside down. Bars and stacked items are okay, but lines can be in areas can be tricky. This is one about Trump tweeting about Obama playing golf. So every tweet's a golf ball, and the size of the golf ball is how many times it got retweeted. Well, of course, why wouldn't you have Obama golfing? Why wouldn't you have Trump watching him? Every one of these is a tweet, right? So there's an image there. There's photographs. There's things that make you understand the topic. There's things that almost approach in a humorous way that make you enjoy it. Here's an example I just love. Now, this is about graffiti in the city of Chicago. Chicago, as you know, is on kind of the southern shore here. You can see the shape of Chicago, and here's a map of Chicago. Well, it turns out that Chicago, records and publishes data for how many times people call in and complain about graffiti. And Johnny Walker, who's a data visualization guru to me out in the UK, made a visualization about all of these works of graffiti, and you can see Chicago. It's a black background map. You can see the city here, and every blue dot is a place where someone complained about graffiti. So there's kind of themes and tones there, okay, which kind of talk about the topic. But what he did next was, to me, sublime, right? What he did was he realized that the shape of the complaints of graffiti in the city of Chicago is just like someone using a spray paint can. And so he put this image of this guy with a spray paint can right next to this waterfront here, the center of the city. Beautiful. And to me, it's genius, right? You're bringing in place a metaphor, and you're making this thing be completely unforgettable. And someone now is going to remember the shape of graffiti complaints in Chicago forever from that. All right, moving along, and we're almost at the Q&A portion here, but a couple slides more to go. Relating like a novelist. So novelists, we love stories, right? We grow up reading stories. They're read to us as kids, and they're things that we just get fascinated about. Words and people and characters kind of pop off this page that we pour through page by page. Stories are all about the experience of our lives and others and relating to people. And I love this quote about that. Go big or go home, right? We love big stories. We love stories about people that conquer themselves, that conquer nature, that overcome obstacles. We love these big stories. And I love this quote by Joseph Campbell, who wrote The Hero with a Thousand Faces. If you're going to have a story, have a big story or none at all. And that reminded me of a guy named Felix Baumgartner who jumped out of this balloon from the stratosphere. It was the largest free fall in history. And I was fascinated about this guy. He jumped. I'm deathly afraid of heights, so extra reason for me to want to know more about it, right? But there's lots of stats about this, right? Fearless Felix, he's called. How high was it? Oh, it was 128,000 feet, right? How high is that compared to how high commercial airliners go or Mount Everest, right? Put it in context. How high was it relative to the record he broke, Joe Kittinger, who beautifully happened to be his coach for this event? Now, that's a side story. I love that story. How fast did he go when he was falling? Here he is, falling toward the earth, plummeting. How fast did he go? Would you believe it? He broke the speed of sound with nothing but a suit on. First human being ever to do that. He went faster than a 22-gauge bullet and then an Airbus or then even a tornado wind, right? So that's how fast he went, pretty fast. When he fell, from the time he jumped out to the time he touched the ground, how long did it take him? Well, about just over 4 minutes, 4 minutes and 20 seconds or so. How long is that? Well, even faster than Joe Kittinger's jump, right? I love how it's really close to the length of the song Free Fallin' by Tom Petty. So trying to put this amazing feat in context and help me understand some numbers and stats that would just be kind of random, right? Like if you told me, oh yeah, he fell at 834 miles an hour, I'd be like, well, that's a lot, but how does that compare to other things that I can relate to or know about, right? So this idea of stories and telling stories with our data that matter, telling stories about people, it's not just the stats that are cold and we can remove ourselves from them. These are stats that include stories about people. Add the anecdotes, tell people about the individuals that you come into contact with that come out of the data. And then oftentimes you can use actual story points. So I'm not going to go into detail here, but there's a great book on this called Storytelling with Data by Cole Nussbaumer-Knopflich, who used to be HR Google, and now she's a great speaker and writer. But she walks us through how you can take data about a product. Let's say you're going to launch a product into a market. And see these little film strips across the top here, 1 to 9? I can actually piece through a story step by step, and I'll zoom to the end, to help people come to a conclusion about what we should do. So stepping someone through the story of the data like a novelist steps you through pages and chapters to help someone see the big picture. So that to me is all about not boring people with data, right? It's about keeping this alive. It's about bringing life and color and vivaciousness and people and story to the things that we show people in our presentations. Because it's about inspiring and informing. It's about using the left and the right brain. But it's not just about the brain. And the reason this matters and the reason why this works is because it's not just about the brain, it's also about the heart. At the end of the day, we're trying to affect the way people feel about things. We're trying to affect what they care about. And we can do that in an ethical way and a powerful way. And that is what I really wanted to talk to you about today. So thank you for your time. We've got a little bit of time left for Q&A. So I know I'm a little over time on my time. So I'm going to turn over to Bill and see, hey, Bill, we got any questions from the people that were listening in?
Well, Ben, hey, thank you for that excellent presentation. And yeah, we've had a lot of questions that have come in. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. And we'll do our best to get through as many of them as we can in the time remaining. So during this Q&A, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for Ben if you'd like to get a hold of him after today's webinar. Well, let's get started. So Ben, I was very struck by the graph that you had up that was memorable versus understandable. And the question comes in, is there ever a time when boring is okay, or when making something look nicer is actually a bad idea?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, it's a trade-off, and I definitely feel like you need to strike a balance. There's some audiences, for example, if you add a bunch of colorful photos and images and such, it would turn them off. Or maybe, you can do it in such a way that is very distracting, and you wouldn't want to do that. Oftentimes in like a war room scenario, there's no time. You just need to get the information quickly because a decision needs to be made in a split second. And there's some in business environments. There's obviously some other kinds of environments where that sort of war room-like kind of command center type approach really puts the premium on communicating a lot of information quickly and easily. And so in those situations, I would tend to avoid adding artistic flair. I would think it would be something that would be getting in the way. But at the same time, I think there's some subtle things you can do in the design and layout and color choices that would cue people in a certain way that I think would be artistic also. It doesn't just mean slapping a photograph on something. Yeah, there are times where that would be the worst thing you could do, you know. So that's not what I'm advocating for. I'm advocating for being artistic and using design and finding the right balance for the given environment and for the people that you're communicating to. So great question. Yeah, but I think at the end of the day, there's a dimension here in the realm of art that people forget, and I think that happens more often than not. So I would ask you to challenge yourself to consider if there is an appropriate use case for it in the environment that you're in. Sometimes it might be light touch, if any. But yeah, I think it's a good question.
Well, Ben, thank you for that great answer. Now, you certainly inspired us to try and zip up our presentations, but there are folks in the audience who fess up to the fact, including myself, who don't have top-notch Photoshop skills. And let me refer back specifically to the African endangered species slide, because that got a lot of questions. Is that something you can do with Tableau Public? How did that author pull in those images? How did he size them? Is that something that you really need a lot of Photoshop skills to do, or is it somehow easier than that?
Great question. So yes and no. So first of all, that visualization was made by someone who I would consider to be a highly talented designer. So RJ is probably good at Photoshop, a whole host of other tools. However, it is pretty easy in Tableau to include custom shapes. That part's not hard. You can just put them in a folder called My Tableau Repository in the Shapes folder, and you can put whatever images you want in there. There can be ones that your company uses. There can be ones you find online. As long as you have copyrights to them and you want to upload them to Tableau Public, go for it. It's not hard to add shapes. Also, he just spaced them out there by putting a location, like a scatter plot location, X and Y, on where he wanted to put them. And that was based on, I think, a custom layout he did beforehand, if I'm not mistaken. So, you know, I think that there are some simple ways for the rest of us, myself included, who aren't as talented a designer as someone like RJ, to do very similar kinds of things with Tableau without a heck of a whole lot of effort. Sizing things is simple. You just take the dimension, and you drag it to the size shelf, and automatically, same thing with color. You know, if I have endangered versus critically endangered and so forth, that's a particular dimension about that animal. I just drag that dimension right to color, and I pick the colors that I want, you know. So there's some things that Tableau lets you do that put us all kind of, I would say, like in the ballpark of doing good design. And yes, there are certainly some people out there like RJ and others, Anya, who take it to a whole different level. And I think those people can be inspiring for us, and we can come close to that.
Well, Ben, thank you, and certainly your presentation has been inspiring as well. But to kind of reflect what many of the audience members have said, gee, I'm good with data, but I'm not particularly an artist. I bet you've got some references or resources that you can point me to where I can get some more ideas.
Yeah, good question. So it's like, hey, I want to get better at that. How do I get better at that? I've always found, for me, you know, we have something called Viz of the Day that we publish in the Tableau Public team every day. And you can just go to tableaupublic.com and click on the gallery there, and you get in your inbox an example. And I think a lot of times for me, getting better is really just, you know, sort of like the highest form of flattery is imitation, right? So learning what people are doing, understanding their techniques, breaking down the things that they create, and taking time to go over it and see what they did. That's usually, to me, the best way. You can probably take a Photoshop class, sure. I don't know, I haven't done that yet, but probably could. But for me, it's just about looking at other examples of work people create and finding ways to employ some of their techniques in the things I'm doing is the best way for me to learn. That's what I've found. So it's just looking at lots of examples and then downloading them if you want to and opening them up and maybe reverse engineering a thing or two that you think is cool. And then you add it to your repertoire, you know, and then the more you do it, the more it sticks with you. So those are some pieces of advice I'd have. Also, just, I don't know, I find a lot of people are on Twitter, LinkedIn, things like that. There's a community of individuals out there who are trying to actually very helpful and trying to make other people better too. So it's a pretty collaborative group out there. You know, it's not super competitive. Nobody will tear you down. Put your work out there. Ask for feedback. That's also a great way. Say, hey, I created this thing. What do you think? This is your person I respect. Would you take a minute to give me some input and give me some feedback on what you think about it? That's a great way to learn and get better. So I highly recommend being courageous enough to do that. You find that people more or less are going to have some good feedback, some good tips, also let you know what you're doing that's working really well. And so that can be a rewarding experience to interact with someone that you respect in that way.
Well, Ben, thank you for some great answers to some very good questions. Now, for those of you who asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll send all those unanswered questions to Ben and the Tableau team, and they can follow up with you after today's webinar. I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for September 27th, that's tomorrow, and that's our next DSC webinar, which will be Deep Learning on Apache Spark Best Practices, and that's going to be sponsored by Databricks. Also remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Tableau for their sponsorship, and particularly to our speaker today, Ben Jones, for his insight into today's topic. Now, my name is Bill Vorhies. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow, September 27th. Have a great day.